Welcome to your first after lunch panel. We hope to keep you entertained and awake is our goal. We set our bars high for this panel. We're going to do a lightning round of introductions and then introduce the panel if that works for everybody. And I just want to remind you, because they've reminded me, if you go into your app, there is live Q&A. So if you have questions or comments, please do feel free to add them as we go, and we will make sure that we address them. So, folks, would you like to start with an introduction, please? Relatively quick one.
Yeah, happily. Hi, everyone. Leo Freeman. I use he, they pronouns. I'm here today representing Capital J Collective, an organization of right now 2+. Folks really working inside the connection between movement and finance. So financial advisors mostly right now, really working to hack the system, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. And also with another hat on, an organization called Oberon. It's a registered investment advisory based in Oakland, California, which is a worker-owned cooperative, BIPOC majority owned financial advisory firm that mostly does just transition financial planning and supports people to redistribute their wealth. Happy to be here with my pals and my friends up there. Astrid.
What the family, huh?
Yeah, truly.
Leo calls it wearing multiple hats. My name is Astrid Scholz, and I have now fully embraced the identity of being a polypreneur, meaning I have multiple social enterprises that look to accelerate the pace of social change. I have a tech company, Armillaria, named after the largest living organism, look it up, that builds impact tech. I am an accidental co-founder of a global movement, Zebras Unite, for businesses like mine that are better for people and planet. And recently I got tired of it all being so damn difficult. I'll also be the one dropping the F-bombs, by the way, eventually. Turned 50 a few years ago and lost all my fucks. And so, with a few other middle-aged ladies, created a game company, Game the System, where we build serious games about stupid systems. Kate.
Hi, everyone. I am Kate Barron-Alicante. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also here with Capital J Collective. A little context that could help set a little bit of this, the stage here. I may sound a little cliche, but the first part of my career, I followed what I thought was the best path to follow and really put my head down and put in the work and was laying a financial foundation for my family. And then I had a change of heart and I decided I wanted to give back to society, help solve some of the biggest problems in the world. And so that's how I moved from social change NGO work into finance. So we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Great. And Evan, nice to see you. Do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thanks so much for allowing me to be on this screen. I'm a little intimidated how big I am relative to the rest of the...
It's giving Wizard of Oz with the green.
Yeah, that's quite stark. My name is Evan Steiner. I'm calling from New York City, and I work for an organization called One Project, which is focused on supporting the new economy space with a focus on just transition and solidarity economy. And my background is in impact investment, social enterprise, and environmental work, and I'm on the research and Sensemaking team at One Project.
Awesome, thanks for that. And my name's Dana Bezerra. I'm stealing Astrid's term, polypreneur. I also stole from Astrid the fact that we don't talk about our career paths anymore. We talk about our career portfolios. Grew up a farmer, but spent a decade, it's a long story, at Merrill Lynch, and then spent 20 years at the Heron Foundation, the last almost decade as president. And then the last couple of years have dabbled, worked with Greater Share, and I'm currently working with CREO, a syndicate of 200 family offices globally, moving money $1 trillion to climate. So that's us. One thing you'll learn very quickly is we like to have a lot of fun. This group spends a decent amount of time together. I want to acknowledge our fearless leader down here in the front, Emma Shaw. Props to Emma. So we will have a relatively informal banter between us. We please encourage you to participate in that. This is a growing community of people who are practitioners, who are doing the doing, and you'll hear a lot from us about what we're coming up against, how we're finding workarounds, what's working, what's not working, and that's sort of the theme. So as we jump in, although the title is gone, this panel is called Hacking the Wealth Defense Industry. So let's just start there. What, Kate, is the wealth defense industry? That's not one I learned about in my meander through higher education.
No, and it's not something I'd put on my resume, yet I do know it from the inside. So we'll start with what is wealth defense, I think, just to slow walk us all through this. And essentially wealth defense, that term, a lot of us know it from the work of Chuck Collins and his book, Wealth Hoarders. And actually, Chuck would point to other social sciences scientists for that terminology, in particular, a political economist named Jeffrey Winters, who does a lot of work on oligarchy. And so wealth defense from these brilliant people is really, the definition has to do with structures and strategies to support both the accumulation of wealth, however we do that, and the prevention of redistribution of wealth, however we do that. It's typically done, wealth defense, through seemingly innocuous professional services. But I would say it's thinly disguised as apolitical, but it is political organizing strategy, a political organizing strategy of the wealthy. So that's wealth defense. But the industry of wealth defense is a multi-billion-dollar industry that's really grown up in the past 40 years or so. And it has grown and it has been birthed in response to a demand, like any good capitalist enterprise would do. And this was a demand coming from the ultra wealthy, the ultra rich. So rich, we're talking about the 0.01% of wealth holders. And the purpose, the demand they had was to stop and reverse efforts for wealth distribution that were happening in the US, in Europe, in the West, on the heels of the Great Depression, post-World War II, mid-20th century context. So the call that was being responded to by this new burgeoning industry was to shift, avoid, evade taxes at the expense of the rest of society, weaken the state's capacity to collect tax, and socialize and entrench pro-rich policies, in particular tax policies. So what does the wealth defense industry look like? It looks like professionalized, white-collar army of gatekeepers who are helping this 0.01% as a part of the 9.9% right below them, right? Helping and getting paid to help in this accumulation and defense against wealth redistribution at the expense of society and the planet. It looks like lawyers, trust lawyers, estate lawyers, corporate lawyers. It looks like finance, it looks like private banks, family offices, investment advisors, financial advisors and planners and wealth managers. And it looks like philanthropy, folks working in donor-advised funds and foundations. The business model of the wealth industrial complex, it should also not be overlooked because it is an industry that is hooked onto wealth inequality. That is how it survives, is and how it's paid. And the methods that I think we're going to get into as things to address, the methods that are undergirding this industry that need to be kind of deactivated, if we think about a bomb, are things like concepts of loyalty to a fiduciary duty, or tools like a Monte Carlo analysis, which somehow seems to never point to someone having enough with that tool. And the business model method also looks like pricing that is tied to the assets that are being managed and really likes to see those assets grow for the business model. So this industry grew out of demand, that the ultra-rich, the 0.1% themselves don't fulfill. There are many of us, myself, put myself in that, who are doing this work on behalf of this call. They didn't exist, and there was a desire to create something to get to yes, right? What is the yes to get to? To create an army of folks who will do this work, to protect accumulation at any cost, and to defend against redistribution at any cost. So, in the name of security for your family, in the name of responsibility and doing right by the wealth that you hold, and in the name of a very narrow definition of intergenerational preservation, this is the wealth industrial complex and the wealth defense industry.
Excellent.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you for that. And just to be clear, by the way, although we are a bit flippant amongst ourselves because we spend a decent amount of time together, we're not calling anybody out. We're in fact calling people in. I think it's fair to say, Kate, that you're an insider to the business. You have a vantage point. I grew up at one point in time inside a very large broker-dealer. I think we've all had some semblance of that. So really just illuminating the inherent juxtaposition around why do clients with more money pay less in fees? Why are clients with more money given white glove service when others are not? Why is accumulation always the end goal? One of my mentors says money is our original unconscious agreement, that we're just simply handed a belief system and we motor on from there. So this group came together some time ago, and Leo, I understand that there was a conversation in a cab, looking at one of our other fearless leaders down there, that led to this conversation. Would you bring us into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I learned in traditional finance, so I too came up in a firm called Smart Investor when I was 27, not that long ago. And I was trained as a traditional financial advisor. I studied jazz trumpet, so naturally became a financial advisor. I'll tell you about that later. But inside of this firm, I really learned a lot about how, you all have heard probably the colloquialism about all deals are made at the urinals or on the golf course. In my experience, I was somebody who was placed as a masculine person, white person, with a lot of privilege inside of a firm directly at the top. Through, the climbing the ladder, basically. I learned a lot about financial planning. I learned a lot about how inside the belly of the beast, how the system works. But one of the things that I've learned since over the years is that in conversations with people, specifically people who I think are marginalized, non-normative folks, women mostly, conversations and curiosity have really led me to be in relationship with the people that I wanted to be. This is how this hacking group came about, is people who are socialized as women, people who are socialized outside of the dominant system. So how I got here last year was actually Steph Brabe, Good Ancestor Movement. Shout out to an amazing effort that's happening here around redistribution, supporting wealthy folks to do that work and become good ancestors. And got me into this place here last year where I was in a conversation with Cassie Robinson, woot woot, more shout outs, in the back of a cab. So our relational context of basically saying, she offered curiosity, what's lighting you up? What are you excited about in the work right now? And I was just kind of fired up. I'd gotten out of this group of radical financial planners talking about trying to help people redistribute wealth inside of a system that is meant to help us amass and accumulate wealth, and using the tools, and I'm kind of like specifically a nerd that got really annoyed about the tech that we were using, financial planning software. I won't name it, but you can probably guess it if you're in finance. It's one of the big three. And we were talking about, inside of radical financial planners, we were talking about how does this software really prohibit the redistribution of wealth? What are the white supremacy assumptions that are built into the technology? Even if you wanted to, could you, Kate mentioned a Monte Carlo analysis. The Monte Carlo analysis basically says, here's 10,000 scenarios that could happen. Here's what it's going to look like, up, up, up. Or here's, the fear mongering that's going to happen based on, the beginning of the stock market, essentially. But then meanwhile, ironically saying, past performance is not an indicator of future results, right? So they'll plug this into the program. So this software is deeply frustrating and is the thing that when you go, or wealthy folks go to their advisor, or an investment committee goes to their advisor, financial advisor specifically, and says, can you help us spend this down? Can you help us redistribute? Can you help us reallocate to community investments? Can you do something that's kind of non-traditional off Wall Street? And generally the answer is no, right? I think Rye mentioned on the panel before lunch, the idea that we can kind of organize wealth holders all that we want, and then we get to this wall that is the financial advisor, or is the estate planning attorney, or is the accountant, all kind of working in our own silos. And so what I said to Cassie, long story short, was that I was like, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could organize around a software, basically what Indy had mentioned last year, Indy Johar, Dark Matter Labs, had said, the boring revolution. The folks who are the spreadsheet people, the people working behind the scenes, who are the tinkerers, kind of happening in the hidden wiring of the system. So what came out of that was a group of us saying, we could be boring revolutionaries. We could come together as some folks who, shout out to Emma for holding that, and who could really come together to be the hackers, inside the system. So because we have an understanding of it, and because we're also kind of grouchy with zero fucks to give. Yeah.
I actually have a candle on my desk that says my last fuck, it's on fire.
Right.
So I'm just saying.
Oh, I have one that says fresh out of fuck.
There's a chain. Apologies for the language, but it's our outlet of frustration. All right, so when we're talking about these unquestioned and unexamined systems and belief systems that underpin our financial system, we also decided amongst us to title this panel The Hacking of the Wealth Defense Industry. So, Astrid, when we talk about hacking, what does that look like? What could it look like? For anybody in the new economy movement, I've heard Astrid invoke our friend Bucky Fuller and his notion of trim tabs. So what do we mean by hacking, and what does that look like in practice?
Well, Kate asked an interesting question just as we sat down and said, Astrid, what's your PhD in? Like, why are you Dr. Astrid Scholz? Do you have a PhD in like hacking? And I'm like, you know what? I kind of do. I studied ecological economics. And just by putting those two words together and applying the principles of ecology and the living planet to economics, and it's math that drives our thinking, our politics, and those dreaded financial planning tools, you're immediately in a different kind of mind frame that these things need to be reconciled in a way that are not true in our world today. The way I summarize my academic background is to say, the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of nature. And when you think about that deeply, and in all the math, very different things fall out of that. And then you see how the systems are currently configured, and you go, oh, these systems are broken. They need an intervention. And that's what hackers do, right? When you think about hacker sort of in the software sense, they sort of probe and poke at poorly designed systems to both surface the hidden wiring and the bias that is baked into the tools and the models in addition to the thinking, and also to develop alternatives, right? So the hacking in our title and in our group here is meant to be deeply practical and pragmatic, not just to break stuff, but to build the new things that we need to get to the future that we want. So not the talking about the problems, but how do we get to the solutions, and the point of view we take is it's not going to be incrementalist, it's going to be disruptive, we're going to be hacking some systems. And not all of those hacks will actually be technological, right? Even though the word, the background of it comes out of tech, and yes, I have a tech company, but not all of the hacks will be tech, right? They could be legal. They could be psychological. Like we were hearing about, the humanity of wealth holders. Well, how can they hack their own humanity in ways that allows them to fire their wealth advisors that are giving them bad advice, right? Like, how do you make that safe? How do we reimagine not just Monte Carlo simulations, but also the tools that don't allow you to see your portfolio through the lens of the actual impact it is having on people and planet, right? So that's sort of the stance. And we come at this at a moment in time when technology has become so pervasive, right? We're all sitting here with our supercomputers in our hands. And the technology exists to do the things that we want it to do better by people and planet. And yet, we all know this phenomenon, right? Like the technology is pervasive, but we don't have the right technology yet. I'm just going to stick with that for a minute because that's one of my current pursuits. By show of hands, how many of you have had an ad follow you around a bunch of different social media platforms? Like you look at a pair of shoes once and it keeps following. Yeah, see? Just about everybody in the room. I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day about menopausal hair loss, which is not my problem, as you can see. But clearly, one of my apps was listening. And now my fucking Instagram is inundated with solutions for women experiencing menopausal hair loss. Now, I want the information about scalable, investable solutions from wherever they might be in the globe, because genius is distributed very equally around the globe. It's not concentrated in the north. I want that to be as ubiquitous on our platforms, in our technology, so that it becomes super easy for investors to make those decisions, to discover that stuff, to aggregate across sectors and geographies, to develop new investment opportunities and instruments. And I mean, we're already holding the building blocks of that technology in our hand. We just might need to invest in some new specific interventions to make that possible. So technology is one of the dimensions of the hacks we seek, but not the only one.
Yeah,
I love that.
Great. And I don't want to let you off the hook, trim tab. Because I think it's such a beautiful analogy for what we're trying to do.
The trim tab, so those of you who may or may not be familiar with Bucky Fuller, right? Like what we're talking about is when we're redirecting wealth, the multi-generational wealth transfer that's about to happen with 30 trillion or whatever, from its current extractive uses into uses that benefit people and planet. It's like trying to steer the Queen Mary, right? It's like trying to turn a massive ocean liner like the Titanic before it hits the iceberg, right? Like that's the goal. If you listen to Indy, right? Like we have to change course like yesterday, yesteryear, yesterdecade. How does a big ship actually begin to turn, right? It's you think, well, you turn the wheel, right? Like no, it's actually the rudder ultimately that determines that. And on top of the rudder sits a trim tab. Somewhere along the way, some clever engineer came up with this idea that you'd actually begin the turn of the rudder by turning the little flap on top. And that's a hack, if you will, in the mechanics of how propulsion works in water when you have a very large ship. And so I think part of how we think about this is like, what are the trim tabs? What are the things that, the specific things that we redesign and subvert to begin the turning of the Queen Mary or the Titanic? Pick your doomed ocean liner.
Yes. And we're going to talk more about what some of these hacks look like, both the ones we're hacking actively and the ones we run up against. But Evan, you occupy a slightly different space in the market. We're talking about wealth management. Can you talk about what the challenges in hacking looks like from where you sit?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think Astrid pointed to it with the example with her PhD, in that when you start studying ecological economics and start viewing the economy as emerging out of ecology and inextricably linked, you start getting into aspects of a set of key assumptions that are fairly pervasive and that there's some debate over, but that still kind of are operating at the basic level of the economy. So an obvious one is the growth paradigm. Right? We're operating a economic system where if it does not continue to grow, it has a lot of challenges because you start defaulting on all the debt, you move into recession or depression. But if you continue to grow, it's so inextricably linked with the energy and material utilization of nature that you start blowing past planetary thresholds. And so you're in this kind of inherent predicament. And if you think about it, many of the people that are operating at this, the wealth defense industry, are kind of the gatekeepers of that. They're the ones that are holding that line, because especially so much of the wealth management is still focused on profit maximization, just growing the portfolio and all these aspects. That's what success looks like. And there's all this infrastructure and there's all this ideology which is predicated on maintaining that. And so that, in many ways, is kind of this front lines of a broader kind of new economy question about how do you raise standards of living, how do you support people, support an economy while not completely blowing past planetary thresholds and destroying the ecological basis, as well as having other social phenomena such as issues with governance, issues with democracy that we're also starting to see among, and of course issues with inequality. So I think that's at a very high level some of the ideological challenges that then get kind of extrapolated into the ways in which these industries function. The other thing I would say that would be a challenge in terms of hacking this, also what the panel is pointing to, are many of these interventions. The way that I kind of relate to it around these hacks is it's a lot about building infrastructure that would be replicable, and that one group doing something or figuring out some hack, and then that could be utilized in different contexts, and other groups can use the same. So to draw a couple of examples, I saw this, more in the impact investment world over the past 15 years or so. If you look at the book Adventure Finance by Ami Powers, you see these like templatized investment structures that were looking at how do you move beyond traditional venture capital and equity to other structures like revenue-based financing or redeemable grants. So developing these structures that then can be utilized elsewhere. Or in the past few years, the development of structures like perpetual purpose trusts, which allow a transition of private ownership of companies to collective ownership. And the groups that develop those models, it's expensive at first. It takes a fair bit of resources and money to work with lawyers and to run risky experiments and to see what works and what doesn't work. And I see that nowadays too with other groups working perhaps on like systems finance or some of these other areas where they're running into a little bit of challenges because you need philanthropy to kind of step up with enabling of some of these experiments and enabling of these infrastructure and hacks. And there's certainly some progressive funders that are out there, but I think there can be a little bit of not enough risk tolerance or not enough experimentation. And so some of these potential hacks probably don't get as much support as they could be. And that would be really beneficial if there was more capacity focused in those directions.
Yeah, okay. And it feels like an appropriate moment, a question or a comment from the audience. Do the people in the wealth defense industry know that they're pawns in a game? What do y'all think? Don't make me go first.
What do you think?
I know you haven't got to ask any questions of yourself.
So given the panel, and thank you, Iris, for bringing it up earlier, of invoking humanity, look, I think most people on most days are trying to do the best job that they can for themselves and their families. And so I do think if you asked, and having grown up at a large broker-dealer, I do ask quite pointedly, fairly frequently, are you aware of the deleterious role you're playing in our financial system? And the answer is usually like, look, I'm the best FX trader I can be. That's what I'm doing. I'm not thinking contextually because they're not compensated, rewarded, or otherwise asked to think contextually. And the environment is very competitive. And at my broker-dealer, I'm going back a ways, every quarter your production merits came out and you literally went right down the list and picked your office. So you're kicking the other person out and production in a financial sense in profitability to the firm is what is most rewarded. So as long as you stay head down in that system, I don't think people are inherently bad. I think they are operating in the system that they have chosen. Now, I think it is a big part of our job, especially those of us stewarding wealth and working with wealth holders, to be calling the question, if only to be disruptive. So at the Heron Foundation, just by way of example, our mission was helping people in communities to help themselves. That was largely a anti-poverty social justice mission, but our inside voice was to disturb other people's trustees. And so we would just pretty regularly go to their meetings and say, yes, we're here to talk about, pick your term, impact investing, ESG, SRI, dating myself before that. And we would regularly say things like, oh, you want to know if our returns, if there's a give up in our returns because of the type of investing we're doing. Well, number one, we'll get to that, but can we just agree that then that necessarily means your returns are overly inflated because you're privatizing gains and offloading problems to democratize them across society? Is that what we're talking about?
Is this thing on?
I'm worried when things are straight.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
I'm on.
So a big part of what I think we have an obligation to do is just to be that, everybody's had a mosquito at a barbecue, right? Just to continually ask the question and to invite people to, forgive me, contemplate what their role is in the system. So I don't think people are aware that they're pawns. I hope to disturb them to that recognition that then calls them to their own attention to say, what is it I'm doing here? Yeah. And what is my role in the planet we leave to our children? So, but what do you all think?
Tough to follow.
I sometimes wonder what it would be like to bring some of these folks together on like a cruise ship, sort of lock them up for a week.
The Titanic, did you say?
Oh, sorry, inside voice. No, I'm just, there's various events like Summit at Sea, and I just talked to somebody who came from like a luxury cruise where all they did was play games, like D&D and board games and whatever. And I thought, what would it be like to bring wealth advisors together on a ship for a week where they had to listen to Dana for like a week? and maybe they get some like, professional education credentials out of it. And most importantly, maybe they would meet other people who are also feeling a little bit disconcerted by the work they're doing, but they just don't run into them at the urinals and in the golf courses, right? But what it would be like to actually sort of send up a flare and say, hey, are you a wealth advisor who's maybe doubting your existence? Dial 1-800, But seriously, like, how do you know? Because when we wrote the Zebra Manifesto a few years ago, it was like 4 of us going, man, the venture capital world really sucks for us because they don't understand what we're trying to build, but they don't understand that we're not interested in exits. They don't have capital that's responsive to us, and they're asking me the wrong questions about my business. And literally 10,000 people stuck up their hands. Like, what would happen if you put up a manifesto that says, hey, do you feel weird about the job you're doing against this planetary crisis? And chances are a lot of these folks have teenagers. Dana and I were comparing notes. Teenagers who are in mental distress about the state of the world. So yes, you might be growing your clients' money from 9 to 5, and then you go home and over dinner you're wondering where you're going to find the mental health support for your teenager because they don't see a future for themselves in the world you're helping create. And I have to believe that these people are, because they're human, right? They're able to put the 2 pieces together and are probably sitting with some tension there. And wouldn't it be nice? And I go back to a cruise as a fun place to go. Could be a retreat in northern Italy, that'd be my preference. But like, how do you make it fun and pleasurable? Which is what I learned from a young one from Bristol earlier. How do you make this sort of pleasure forward, like the discovery of solutions, and do that in a way that reconciles these tensions? I bet they're out there, the tensions.
Yep. Yeah. I suspect that's true.
A few things to say. I love the question. Thanks for sending that in. I think deep down in a quiet space, most people know that they're a part of something. You feel, even in your own personal life, that you're hustling, you're hoarding, you're trying to get something better for your kids. And why is that? Like, what's going on at a meta level that's creating that inside you? Because it is logical in our current social and economic system to feel that you have to get more. It's not illogical. It's the system we've designed that we're all sort of out here scraping on our own and fighting each other to get to retirement. But there's a non-cruise type place called Zoom. To your point, that a number of years ago in COVID, there were a few of us who reached out, like, do you know, I'm in this space of finance, but I feel a certain way, but I'm actually in it because I know it's a tool to unlock, but like I can't really talk about it in my job because there are people here who are not thinking about this in that way. So over time, from the Iris, Leo, we were part of these early conversations. It's grown into a 300-person standing space that exists not on a cruise ship or in a northern Italian retreat, which would be lovely, but just the need for community and space and camaraderie for the people that are grappling with this is real, and it's where knowledge is shared, it's where opportunities to transition and roles is shared, it's where people trying out new projects, that's where that's shared, and I think it's a place where courage is cultivated, and that's really what is needed, because it's not that clients aren't coming and asking for a change. I think like there's been a lot of successful conversation in philanthropic spaces and other spaces to say, like, this could be done a different way, and on a spectrum of what that different could look like. But it is the folks who receive those questions who just stall out and don't really know how to ask, how to answer it. And that's so much work that is still continued to be needed inside this wealth defense industry. If you have the glimmer that if you're getting the ask, right, if that demand is now shifting, okay, so then how do we get to yes, to do something different? This is the work that's needed for the hack.
Yeah. Great. Couple of questions coming in, and one, Anastasia, if you're out there, I encourage you to chime in because I want to make sure I get the sentiment right. So, Excellent. Helen, do you want to share, please, so we can respond appropriately?
Well, it's just a simple question because it seems like we've seen a lot of them, and it sort of creates this incredible polarization.
Yeah.
And it gives, first of all, a pathway for them, listening from either side.
Yeah.
And also, it's sort of like we now know that the world is one, and what happens in one part of the world affects all of us. Not part of us is going to make it, another part of it. We all either going to survive or not. So I just feel like this then, maybe such a, I guess it's useful to phrase the vision accurately, or is it just a question of the system was built the way it was built, it works perfectly, I think we all can acknowledge it works perfectly, and we just need to hack that system before we can transform it into something else.
Yep.
My question is,
Yeah, no, and part of the reason, thank you for that, part of the reason I wanted to make sure we address that is I think in this work, we can't become doctrinaire about our point of view. We're trying to hack the existing system. That doesn't mean we have it figured out. And so I think the us versus them that you point to is not productive, actually. And I think we're being quite playful up here, in case you haven't noticed, but I think I do think your point is really well taken, that people don't want to belong to something that shuns them. That's just a human response. And so always creating the space, if my coaches were out there, they would be very proud, I think. My personal narrative around this is that in every interaction, whether it's with somebody on the subway in New York or with a wealth holder, is to always hold space for connection, because one, that's hard, and two, it's tiring. It's a lot. So to hold space for connection and to bear witness to the context of the others. So what is their context? I may not share it, but can I empathize with it? Can I move from there? And I suspect you all are very similar. You would agree with Anastasia's point that the framing of us versus them is not inclusive enough to call folks in. So I want to thank you for making the point that we're being playful and the us versus them framing is not productive. So would you all agree? I don't want to speak for all of us.
I feel like I've been speaking from a lot of we and I, so personally, right? So trying to name one's position in this work and the complexity of that position, I think, is critical for all of us, and I think it's important for all of us to share our stories in this work too,
Yeah, I'll just add quickly.
Please, of course.
I'm terrible with what time it is. There's no, but I think it's a great question. I think it's one of those moments of getting to be in the humility, and also to notice that one of the things, radical planners was evoked a minute ago, the idea that these spaces of collectivism and coming together as professionals or people inside of financial services, finding our people. To me, feels like a recovery program. Feels a lot like, hi, I'm Leo and I have a problem. And to me, it's important, right? And there should be 12 steps for financial advisors for healing. And so I think and I joke about it, but I've also been through 12 steps. And I think it's a really important thing to notice about, moving from othering to belonging, moving from ownership to stewardship to kinship requires us specifically thinking about wealth holders as a person who came up working class, noticing that my class rage is one of the things that gets in my way around organizing and kind of being kin with wealthy folks. And so specifically noticed that, as an American Jew, witnessing that inside of a bloodline lineage, if we look at othering and us and them, that puts me on the us side of what, I was raised and indoctrinated in a system that said, Israel is our place. It's a land without people for a people without land. And so for me, the piece about being a financial advisor is I was jammed into this system. I was indoctrinated into this way of being, and I was a them, and it was very polarized. And I think to me that point is so much about it's just a good lesson in the moment. So thanks for lifting it up. Yeah.
Couple of things. So we have some questions that I want to make sure we address, but I also want to share with the audience, from fiduciary duty to trust law to handling external advisors, we do have a bunch of actual hacks we want to share. There's an entire next session that immediately follows this one that will not be live streamed, that will be Chatham House, where we will be covering some very specific, this is what I'm up against, here's what I'm trying. Bring yours too. But I also think I want to just pause for a moment, kind of chair's prerogative, don't panic, Emma, that around this idea that has been surfaced. We spend a lot of time talking about, we're very left brain, right? We're talking about numbers, we're talking about systems, we're talking about technology. But we spend a lot of time amongst us talking about the work, the soft work, the human work. And so just to give an example, and I know you all have similar examples, I participated on an endowment group for a university. And at a recent meeting, we spent the entire meeting discussing the incident of student homelessness. It was above 20% across the state of California. And sleeping in cars, couch surfing, all these things. And everybody's like, oh my God, this is horrible. And then we have lunch. And then we come back to the investment discussion. And the investment advisor reports out. And the board immediately votes to reduce the spending rate because they're worried about the macroeconomic environment to below 4%. And I lost my ever-loving shit. Like, this is not a hedge fund with a small education program attached. This is a uni whose job is to educate the next generation. And because I'm me, which means I'm shy and demure, I asked the group, like, what is motivating that decision? It's completely illogical with the conversation we were just having. And of course, they immediately broke and went to like calm Dana downland. And the conversation that ensued in the hallway, not kidding, was fear of embarrassment with my colleagues, fear of my name being emblazoned on this endowment in the years it went down. The endowment balance shrunk. And so very human, base Maslow's hierarchy of needs stuff around I don't want my peers, my contemporaries to think I'm capable of bad judgment when it comes to stewarding financial resources. And so we can and we will, because it's real, talk about, don't even get me started on fiduciary duty, but if we need to take those concepts on. But at the end of the day, if somebody asks me, do we as funders, and Evan, I want to come back to you, do we as funders need to fund more research to articulate fiduciary duty? Yeah, sure, fine, we should probably do that. But what we need to get to first is people don't care until you can help them be brave with the people they think that judgment matters. And so stealing from Westmore, an American governor, we really have to learn to not let people who don't matter too much matter too much. And then we'll get to a better place. So.
Okay.
But your opinions, before we go back to, thank you for sending these in, and we'll either get to them in this session or the next one, but on the softer sciences, anything y'all want to, I see you smiling, Evan, thank you for that. Anything you want to add before I put us back on track for the last 8 minutes?
Sure, there's a Douglas Adams quote that I really like because I think it describes a lot of the collective action problem that we're discussing. And that's the raindrop does not feel responsibility for the flood. Yeah. And I think what this is pointing to is there's a lot of raindrops, and all of those, all of the people are doing, and as it's expressed, it's not only they're doing the best they can, it's that there's a set of assumptions or beliefs that underpin it that are also, beneficial. You can draw parallels with, for example, like you could say the fossil fuel industry. There's a lot of deriding of the fossil fuel industry and, attack of them, and I think that's very warranted. And at the same basis, you can say, this is powering the global economy. It's enabling people in all sorts of ways. Everybody in the room right now that's there benefited from fossil fuels. They use it to get there. They would not be existing in the way that you are without it. And so it exists at that paradox. It's the thing that's enabling. It's also the thing which is destroying. And so there just needs to be a lot of compassion and honesty around that. And and just acknowledging the raindrops and not necessarily vilifying. I'm not saying that it's bad or wrong. It's just that's part of the overall pattern. Is that these individual actions in aggregate lead to these collective action problems, which are not really benefiting us. And how do you shift those dynamics? How do you shift it from the perspective of worldview and ideology? How do you shift it from the perspective of policy, incentives? How do you build the infrastructure to move things in a different direction and kind of layer those pieces together a bit more holistically?
Got it. Follow-on thoughts? Okay. Great. Well, Evan, while you're off mute, question for you from the audience, and Chris, if you're out there, please chime in if I get the context wrong. To what extent, Evan, would you say that progressive funders, in air quotes, who might sponsor the hacking are dependent on the same system of wealth defense as the objects of the hack?
Touché.
Yeah, it's inevitable. I kind of, when this question comes up, it's always around this sort of orientation of prefigurative politics, which means how are we acknowledging where we are in the systems that we're embedded within, while working to embody alternative practices in the kind of the world that we would like to see, and just being realistic and acknowledging that. And there's more egregious and less egregious behavior. There's more egregious and less egregious ways in which wealth was originally accumulated. There's more egregious and less egregious ways in which it's currently managed. And I think it's more just about being really direct and honest about that. And I know some other folks that are there who have written books about this, like post-capitalist philanthropy, that really get a little bit more into the details of this and kind of acknowledging and then are looking forward towards what is the prefigurative politics that we would like to see, and working. And it's those transitions that I think are the most important.
Yeah, great. First, Sarah Bender, I don't know where you are, but we love you. Thank you for the comment. Astrid, do you want to tackle the one about pleasure forwardness? Did you get to read that? Would you like
Yes. Do you want to read it back for the audience, though?
Okay. So, love the idea of pleasure forwardness, but what do these people do when they get back? Where do they go? Or if they're on the Titanic. Sad face. The monetization of tech leads to the monetization of creativity. And who owns the genius? We were talking about this with AI earlier. And Berners-Lee Internet was made to be free. How does that, ultra-hack be replicated? Well, whilst learning lessons from the internet.
My sigh made a very loud noise. Long breath.
Those are 3 questions.
Okay.
Right, that's a lot. Where do they go when they come back from their mind-altering journey with Dana on the not Titanic cruise? I think they join the League of Intrapreneurs, which is an actual thing. Look it up.
It is.
Because it's incredibly difficult to be the person inside a larger institution who actively wants to do things differently, and there are resources to help you do that work. And then some of them will get sick and tired of the organizations they work for, and they will create new organizations. Maybe they're cooperatively organized financial advisors who use sociocracy amongst themselves and create different KPIs for themselves for how they advise clients. Right? And yes, it will change the incentive structures. And there's some interesting work that's beginning to be done where some funds, for example, adopt outcome-based compensation. Outcome-based compensation, not just tagged to financial performance of the stuff you're investing in, right? So it's possible, and it requires work, and that work is hard and taxing. And I mean, there are lots and lots of people in this room who do hideous amounts of emotional labor in oppressive systems all day, every day. What will be interesting about the financial planners, all of a sudden it'll be like middle-aged white guys who discover that it's really hard to do this work of trying to change systems. It's like, yes, welcome to our world, friend. But seriously, we want more of everybody to be leaning into the work of making systems change and doing little hacks, small and large, wherever you are. And that's, I think there'll be some pathways like that emerge when they come back.
Great. In our next minute and 38, 37, 36 seconds, lightning round, just preview to the next session. Can you give a name to 2 or 3 of your favorite hacks or the ones you're biggest wrestling with at the moment, the most troubling?
Ooh, those are all.
Lightning round.
It's intersectional. Sorry. I will just want to also name that in the querying and the hacking of all that we do, I think also we're doing that inside of this conference. So there's a website listed, hackingwealth.xyz, that is our sort of coalition, distributed power coalition of all of us, just not as individuals. So feel free to reach out. Also, we all have QR codes that we're going to ask you to come find us. So if you're going to, we're not going to share it out. So if you want to have a conversation, we can share a QR code that takes you to our work that we're kind of building. But But hack-wise, for me, a take on modern portfolio theory that, by the way, Dana pointed out yesterday, 1952, which was the year that the Queen's daddy died, I think was right. That was the year that, may her memory be for a blessing. And then was when the modern portfolio theory was developed. And so there's a new sort of updated take on that, social movement investing out of the Center for Economic Democracy, which is a really, I think, beautiful way to incorporate social movement investment, due diligence principles. Also, there's a coalition of folks working on this idea of enough, thinking about, which Kate, I'm sure will share about this, but taking on family offices. We're working around chosen family office. So the idea that we're really bringing people together in a different way around chosen family versus just blood lineage. So happy to talk about any of that stuff. Astrid?
10 seconds. Favorite hacks?
Yeah, Shiza, are you in the audience? Shout out to my friend Shiza Shah, who is building an Islamic finance cooperative, which is genius, because when you think about the principles of Islam and Sharia, where we don't do interest, for example, and we center equity and justice, I want to see more of that. I think that's a brilliant hack to build out a different way of influencing incredibly wealthy family offices in certain parts of the world.
Quick.
Contextualizing one's individual wealth line of enough inside systems of justice led by social movement thinking.
Evan?
Yeah, I've been trying to mention different books, and I'll mention the last one that comes to mind is just came out called Assets in Common, which is assetsincommon.org, which is exploring kind of next evolution of infrastructure such as shared balance sheets and cooperative holding companies for shared ownership organizations.
Nice.
Awesome.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you all. Oh, fiduciary duty and trust busting. So
We love it.
anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for putting up with us today. And do go to the next session if you want to hear more about this.
Thank you, Dana.